Shebo, please read the title to House Bill 1238.
House Bill 1238 by Representatives Joseph and Camacho, also Senator Kipp, concerning requirements for gun shows.
Colleagues, today we are debating the passage of House Bill 1238, a critical measure to improve safety and accountability at gun shows. This bill is not about restricting the right of responsible gun owners. It is about ensuring that gun shows operate with basic common sense safeguards to protect public safety. Right now, gaps in regulations allow firearms to be sold without proper oversight, creating opportunities for theft, illegal transfers, and risky safety risks. House Bill 1238 takes a balanced approach to closing these regulatory issues while maintaining fairness for responsible vendors and attendees. The core of this bill requires gun show promoters to implement security plans, obtain liability insurance, and establish video surveillance at these events. These measures will help prevent theft, unauthorized access to firearms, and other safety hazards. Just as we expect other large-scale events to have security protocols in place, gun shows should also take responsibility for the safety of their patrons and the surrounding community. We have engaged directly with stakeholders, including gun show promoters, to refine this legislation and ensure it works in practice. Based on this feedback, we will be introducing amendments to include allowing individuals to bring firearms for sale, barter, or consignment at gun shows, adding a petition clause so that citizens have a formal process to challenge provisions they find burdensome, provide exceptions for military members under 18 years old, recognizing their training and service, clarifying that curio and relic firearms can be brought and sold at gun shows, strengthening the legislative declaration to make sure that state laws already prohibit the sale of high-capacity magazines and unserialized receivers. This bill does not change those existing restrictions. We are also going to be bringing amendments that require the responsible separation of ammunition and firearms at gun shows to reduce safety risks, ensure that federal firearm licensees hold valid state permits and certificates of compliance, reinforcing accountability among vendors, removing fee restrictions for background checks, ensuring cost is not a barrier to conducting these essential safety screenings. At its core, this bill is about responsibility. Gun shows should not be an avenue for illegal or unsafe firearm transfers. By ensuring background checks, security measures, and vendor accountability, House Bill 1238 will prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands, while allowing responsible gun owners and vendors to continue their lawful business. This is a common sense approach that balances the rights for public safety. Organizations like Everytown for Gun Safety, Colorado Ceasefire support and recognize that these reasonable regulations save lives. I urge my colleagues, I urge an aye vote. And I'll pass this on to my co-prime, Representative Joseph.
Ever feel like you're looking at a couple of pieces of a much larger puzzle, especially when you're trying to understand how new laws come about and, who's really influencing them?
It happens all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Things seem separate, but then you look closer.
Exactly. So today, we're doing a deep dive into two pieces of Colorado legislation from 2025. That's HB 25-1238 and SB 25003. And we're exploring the role a group called Everytown for Gun Safety played in their journey through the state legislature.
Right. And what's particularly interesting, I think, is how these two bills tackle different sides of firearm regulation.
Yeah.
It kind of suggests there might be a coordinated strategy behind them.
That's what we want to unpack. We're going to try and connect the dots between these two pieces of legislation, clarify what they're trying to do about gun control in Colorado, and look at the apparent influence, anyway, of Everytown's lobbying.
And we'll dig into the specifics of each bill,
Okay.
right? The arguments for and against, based on what our sources tell us.
Absolutely. Always keeping our focus just on the information in the sources. We've got stuff discussing the bills, the legislative process, who is involved, organizations, individuals, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Amendment 21 is properly displayed. Representative Caldwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So because this original amendment was trying to clean up some language in the legislative declaration, my amendment takes issue with the entire legislative declaration. So I am looking to strike the legislative declaration. And I'm just going to go through a few parts of it here and explain the issues I have. So starting in section 1 on the bottom of page 2, line 2, It declares that the General Assembly finds and declares that gun violence remains a significant threat to public safety in Colorado, causing harm to individuals, families, communities across the state. And then it goes on to declare that effectively addressing gun violence requires a comprehensive strategy that includes both preventing illegal firearm transfers and ensuring responsible ownership practices. I kind of feel like it's talking about ensuring responsible firearm ownership practices, and what this bill is doing is regulating gun shows and not promoting responsible firearm ownership practices. So I take issue with that language on page 3, line 3. It does state effectively addressing gun violence requires comprehensive strategy, and I don't disagree with that statement. I don't think it's related to this bill as far as regulating gun shows, just for the simple fact that I tried to do some research on this issue. So I went to the trusty internet and I tried to look up gun violence at gun shows in Colorado, and I could not find a single instance going back at least 15 or 20 years. I couldn't find a single story even about just a discharge, an accidental discharge. If you actually go to gun shows, they clear all the guns before you come in already. That's a thing they already do. And so we don't even have accidental discharges there, which wouldn't actually be gun violence because the word violence has intent behind it. And so, the legislative declaration declaring that gun violence is an issue, sure, I think we all agree gun violence is an issue, but to this bill itself, which is regulating gun shows, they don't go together. I would say that addressing gun violence, starts with responsible gun ownership and practicing with your gun and teaching your kids responsible gun ownership. Then it moves on to page 3, line 4. Gun shows serve as important venues for the lawful sale and transfer of firearms. That part of the legislative declaration I actually do find true. Moving on to the next sentence, it says, however, these events present unique challenges for regulating the movement of firearms and preventing illegal trafficking. I take issue with the fact that it presents, we're declaring that it presents unique challenges for gun shows, and I don't understand what the unique challenges is. It's unclear, it doesn't specify what unique challenges are for the movement of firearms at a gun show. And it says, again, it moves on to things that's just not happening. So the end of that sentence says, preventing illegal trafficking. Again, if you go back right now, there's no evidence in Colorado that illegal firearms trafficking is happening in Colorado at gun shows. There's literally no stories that I could find doing the research on this. And so I don't understand why in the legislative declaration, we are declaring as a General Assembly that gun shows present unique challenges for gun trafficking when it's not happening. And if it is, I would love to see the evidence for it because I couldn't find anything.
Macho.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do greatly appreciate the comments from my colleague from El Paso County. And there's a few things that he said that I found really persuasive. If gun shows are already meeting these requirements, then they should encourage this bill, because what it really does is level the playing field for those who are not. So if you already have insurance, if you're already checking and making sure you follow the laws, then you should welcome this, because there are some gun shows that are not. But more importantly, this amendment L021 has not been stake held, so I respectfully ask for a no vote.
Representative Richardson. We're on Amendment 21.
Yeah, the sponsor did mention there were gun shows that do not, and the offer of the amendment asks for some facts. Do you have examples of gun shows in Colorado that have not followed proper procedures specifically that are addressed in this bill?
Representative Camacho.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing a slight detour from the purpose of this discussion, which is Amendment 021. But I would point to my colleague and say, during committee, we had very robust discussions and witness testimony about how there were very blatant issues at gun shows, from selling high-capacity magazines to ghost guns to doing illegal transfers in parking lots, which is all illegal under Colorado law, which is why this regulation is necessary. Again, I would urge a no vote on Amendment L21.
Representative Luck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of some of the information that was presented at committee, we had our minority staff look into some of the details. We also had a legal memo prepared by the Office of Legislative Legal Services to help us with some of the questions that were raised. I do want to note that there were a variety of folks who testified to seeing capacity magazines that were above what the legal limit is on sale. And it is possible, actually, under state law, for them to sell, so long as they're selling to those people or categories that were exempted under House Bill 13-1224, which can include someone who is not a Colorado resident. I will also note that there was a statement made about weapons being stolen from a parking lot. We contacted a variety of different law enforcement agencies from the surrounding area and asked them to verify that indeed there were guns stolen from the parking lot of a gun show, and none of them had ever heard of it and could not, in fact, verify. And we're quite surprised to learn of this story because I guess there are different internal reports that they send to each other when such things take place, and they have not received anything and did not know of any of that. So there is some dispute as to the veracity of those stories that were presented in committee. Thank you.
Representative Caldwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the very good dialogue from my colleague over here and the bill sponsor. And I want to point out that in your comments, you talked about your stakeholding and that you had heard about issues with selling high-capacity magazines and in gun thefts and parking lots and things like that. I just want to reiterate that those things you listed are already illegal. There are already laws on the book. I don't see how this bill regulating gun shows and forcing a whole bunch more burdens on them is going to address guns being stolen in parking lots and things like that, because we already have laws about safe storage in your vehicle. So this just, it seems redundant, which was to my original point. I also still haven't heard an example of this being a problem at a single gun show in Colorado, which I think was the original question, so thank you.
The question before us is Amendment 21. Representative Kelty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And going back to what the bill sponsor just mentioned a moment ago, if he wouldn't mind letting us know, because I wasn't on the committee, I didn't hear exactly everything that was going on, but if he wouldn't mind letting us know which gun shows in Colorado this is really actually a problem with.
Representative Camacho.
I would ask for a no vote on Amendment L21. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Kelty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay.
So first off, it seems pretty clear from the materials that both HB 25-12428 and SB 25000 were part of this bigger conversation around gun control happening in Colorado back in 2025.
A broader push, yeah.
Yeah.
The main goal seems to be, well, tightening access to firearms.
Let's start with SB 25003. What was that one about?
Okay, SB 25003. The official title is Semi-Automatic Firearms Restrictions. So it's pretty specific. It restricts the sale of semi-auto firearms.
Yeah.
The ones that can take a detachable magazine.
Yeah.
And what really stands out are the new requirements, the hurdles for buying these kinds of guns.
Right. Our sources say a buyer would need, 12 hours of training?
12 hours, yeah. Plus pass a background check and get a permit.
And there's a cost for that permit.
Estimated between $100 and $200 according to the info we asked.
Okay. And who's behind this one? The sponsors.
Senators Tom Sullivan, Julie Gonzalez. And in the House, Representatives Andrew Bosnecker and Mig Froelich.
Got it. And this one became law.
Yep. Signed by Governor Jared Polis on April 10th, 2025.
Okay, April 10th. Now, this is where Everytown really comes into the picture, isn't it?
Very much so. Everytown for Gun Safety was a very vocal supporter of SB 25003. Their senior counsel, Allison she played a big part publicly defending the bill's constitutionality.
That's significant, having that legal argument up front.
It really is. It signals commitment and maybe helps fend off future legal challenges.
Yeah.
Or tries to, anyway.
And it wasn't just the lawyers, right? The sources mentioned grassroots activity, too.
Definitely. Mobilization of their network. We saw testimony from people like Karen Chapman from Moms Demand Action and Alexander Cisneros from Students Demand Action. They spoke about what they called loopholes related to high-capacity magazines.
Right. That testimony was March 11th, 2025. So during the process. Okay, let's shift gears to the other bill, HB 25-1238, the Gun Show Restrictions Bill.
All right, so HB 25-1238 takes a different angle. It focuses on the place gun shows, not the specific type of gun.
Regulating the venue itself?
Exactly. It puts restrictions on the vendors operating at the shows and also on the organizers putting them on.
And this one also moved forward.
It did. Passed both chambers in Colorado, sent to Governor Polis's desk by April 1st, 2025.
April 1st, okay. Now, the source mentions the NRA-ILA called these restrictions undue.
They did, which suggests the restrictions were probably fairly substantial.
What kind of things are we likely talking about? The sources aren't super detailed, but we can guess, right?
We can infer. Probably things like needing extra permits for vendors, maybe stricter background check rules specifically for gun show sales, or even limits on what kinds of guns or how many could be sold there.
It ties into that whole debate about gun shows being a potential loophole, doesn't it?
That's the common concern, yeah, that private sales might slip through without the background checks you get from licensed dealers.
Although licensed dealers have to do checks anywhere, right? Even at shows.
Federal law requires that, yes. The concern is more around private sellers who might not be licensed.
Okay. So how do these two bills, SB 25003 and HB 25-1238, how do they connect?
Well, it looks like they're tackling different points of access.
Right.
Both seem aimed at closing perceived gaps in Colorado's gun laws, which, fits with Everytown's goals.
So SB 25003 puts conditions directly on the buyer for certain guns.
Right.
While HB 25-1238 regulates a place where guns are often bought and sold.
Exactly. And you can see how they might work together. Maybe those SB 25003 requirements, the training, the permit would apply if you tried to buy one of those specific firearms at a gun show regulated by HB 25-1238.
Potential synergy there. Makes sense. Okay, let's focus a bit more on Everytown for Gun Safety's role. These bills definitely seem to align with their big goals: universal background checks, closing loopholes, restricting certain firearms.
Absolutely. And their support for SB 25003 was, like we said, multifaceted. It wasn't just lobbying. Providing that legal expertise through Allison Shee's testimony on constitutionality, that's a deeper level of engagement.
Strategic, yeah. Bolstering the bill's legal footing.
Right, and helping it navigate the process and maybe, just maybe, survive court challenges later.
And the grassroots mobilization we touched on, Moms Demand Action, Students Demand Action testifying, that ground game seems important too.
Hugely important. Having volunteers show up, share stories, put a face to the issue that resonates with lawmakers.
And their focus was specifically on those high-capacity magazine loopholes in that March 11th testimony.
It was, which connects directly back to the types of firearms SB 25003 restricts. And our sources mention Everytown often cites their own research linking magazine-size regulations to fewer mass shootings. That research was likely a big part of their argument for this bill.
Okay. Now, what about HB 25-1238, the gun show bill? The sources don't explicitly say Everytown was involved in that one, do they?
Not directly mentioned in the excerpts we have, no. But given their broader advocacy, it seems highly probable they supported it.
Why is that?
Well, gun shows have been on their radar for a long time. The main concern, again, is that potential background check gap for private sales.
Right. The gun show loophole argument.
Exactly. And we know from our sources about Everytown's priorities in Colorado the previous year, 2024. They pushed for HB 24-1353, which was about state permits for firearm dealers.
Showing a pattern of focusing on sales regulations.
Precisely. So HB 25-1238, tightening oversight of gun show vendors. That fits right into that pattern. Seems like a logical next step for them.
Plus, they have the resources. You mentioned their spending.
Yeah, the sources noted $2.31 million spent on lobbying nationwide in 2024. That suggests they certainly have the financial capacity to influence legislation like this in key states like Colorado.
Okay, let's talk politicians. Representative Andrew Bosnecker comes up specifically as a co-sponsor of SB 25003.
He does, and the materials suggest his voting history shows consistent support for gun control measures.
And he was on a key committee.
Yes, the House Judiciary Committee. That's the committee that actually passed SB 25003 on that 7-4 vote, March 11th, 2025.
So, being on that committee, co-sponsoring SB 25003, having that voting record, it seems likely he'd support the gun show bill too, HB 25-1238.
It seems very likely, yeah. Even though our sources don't explicitly link him to sponsoring HB 25-1238, his overall stance and committee role make his support probable.
And the sources name others who voted yes on SB 25-0003 in that committee.
They do. Representatives Javier Mabray, Michael Carter, Jennifer Bacon, Chad Clifford, Cecilia Espinoza, Lorena Garcia, and Yaris Okai.
All Democrats, it seems.
Yes. It looks like these Democrats, along with Senators Sullivan and Gonzalez, who sponsored it in the Senate, probably formed a sort of working group or bloc that Everytown could, engage with.
Through lobbying or encouraging their supporters to contact them, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Standard advocacy practice.
So stepping back, looking at the bigger picture, passing both these bills, HB 25-1238 and SB 25-003, it does look like a coordinated effort to regulate gun access more tightly in Colorado.
You can definitely see it that way.
Yeah.
One bill, SB 25-003, puts rules on the buyer for specific guns.
While the other, HB 25-1238, regulates a common place those guns might be sold.
Right. And our sources clearly position Everytown as playing a big role in pushing for SB 25-003 and, as we discussed, likely supporting HB 25-1238 too.
And this connects to broader narratives, right? We're not taking sides, but the sources mention the perspective that groups like Everytown, working with some Democratic lawmakers in Colorado, are trying to centralize control over firearms.
That viewpoint is definitely out there. And the sources also touch on the idea that Everytown, while presented as grassroots, gets significant funding from major donors like Bloomberg.
Right. That's part of the context. And we even saw that example of local reaction Representative Bosnecker being called a gun grabber on X for sponsoring a different bill, HB 25-1171.
Yeah, it just shows how charged these issues are locally. Intense feelings on both sides.
Which is why it's so important just to stick to what the sources say. Our goal isn't to agree or disagree, but just to understand the connections, the bills, the groups, the politics based on the info we have.
Absolutely. Presenting the information as clearly as possible.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. We've done our deep dive into HB 25-1238 and SB 25-003. We've seen how they aim to regulate different parts of firearm access in Colorado.
And we highlighted the pretty significant role Everytown for gun safety appears to have played, particularly with SB 25-003 and likely with the gun show bill, too.
We also touched on specific politicians involved, like Representative Bosnecker, and acknowledged the different viewpoints surrounding these laws, all based on our source materials.
So it leads to a final thought, really, for you listening. Thinking about everything we've unpacked today, what other links might exist? Between different laws, maybe, or the groups pushing for them?
Yeah. What other questions does this kind of deep dive raise for you about how laws actually get made? And, the kind of influence different groups might have in shaping the rules we all live under. Something to think about.